Michael was the kind of man people couldn't help but notice. Tall, charming, and with a smile that could melt hearts, he had a natural way of drawing people to him. Women adored him, and he knew it. He walked through life like he owned it, always confident and sure of his allure. But Michael had a dark side. Behind his good looks and smooth words was a man who loved the thrill of the chase more than the people he pursued. He was a Casanova, moving from one woman to another, leaving behind a trail of broken hearts. One of his conquests was Sarah, a sweet woman who worked as a teacher. Sarah was kind, caring, and saw Michael as her dream man. He charmed her with flowers, long conversations under the stars, and promises of forever. She gave him her heart, trusting that he was the one. But to Michael, Sarah was just another fleeting moment of fun. When Sarah discovered he had been seeing other women while telling her she was his only love, her world crumbled. "I thought I meant something to you," she whispered, tears streaming down her face. Michael shrugged, unbothered. "I never promised anything serious," he said, his voice cold. Then there was Linda, a confident businesswoman who believed she had finally found her equal in Michael. They spent weekends traveling together, laughing, and planning for the future, or so she thought. Behind her back, Michael entertained others, always seeking the next thrill. When Linda found out, she was devastated. "You're a liar," she spat, her voice trembling with anger. But Michael only smirked, dismissing her pain. And yet, his charm always worked. Every time he moved on, he found another woman to dazzle, another heart to win, and eventually break. His life was a series of highs and lows, with no care for the wreckage he left behind. One evening, as he sat at a bar scanning the room for his next target, he met Evelyn. She was different from anyone he had ever seen. Her beauty was captivating, almost otherworldly. Her eyes sparkled like the ocean, and her voice was smooth and enchanting. Michael, for once, felt a spark of something unfamiliar, curiosity mixed with desire. Evelyn wasn't just beautiful, she was mysterious. She seemed to know things about him without him saying a word. "You're used to getting your way," she said with a sly smile, her gaze locking onto his. Michael laughed, intrigued. "And you're used to keeping men on their toes," he countered. For the first time, Michael felt he had met his match. Evelyn was mesmerizing, and the more he got to know her, the deeper he fell. But he didn't know her secret. Evelyn wasn't an ordinary woman. Evelyn came from a world Michael couldn't imagine, a realm beneath the ocean, where beauty and danger existed side by side. She was a marine being, a creature of the water, who had come to the surface out of curiosity and longing. She had fallen for Michael's charm, but she also believed he could change. For weeks, they were inseparable. Michael showered her with affection, and for the first time, he felt like he might want to settle down. Evelyn brought out a side of him he didn't know existed, gentle, thoughtful, and almost selfless. But Michael's old habits were hard to break. The thrill of the chase was still in his blood. One evening, while Evelyn waited for him at his apartment, he was out with another woman, whispering sweet lies and making promises he had no intention of keeping. Evelyn found out. She didn't confront him immediately. Instead, she watched from the shadows as he returned home, laughing and carefree. Her heart ached. She had given him her love, and he had betrayed her just like he had done to so many others. That night, Evelyn vanished. When Michael woke up, she was gone without a trace. At first, he shrugged it off. "Another one bites the dust," he muttered, not realizing the storm that was about to hit. A week later, Michael noticed something strange. His body felt different, as if a shadow was hanging over him. Then the pain began, deep, searing pain in a place he had never imagined would betray him. Something was wrong. Terribly wrong. Michael woke up in the middle of the night, drenched in sweat. A sharp pain shot through his body, and he groaned as he sat up. Something didn't feel right. The pain wasn't like anything he had felt before, it came from his private part. He stumbled to the bathroom, turned on the light, and looked down. His heart stopped. The skin looked strange, almost like it was rotting. What is this?" he whispered, fear gripping him. He splashed water on his face, hoping he was dreaming, but the nightmare was real. The next morning, Michael tried to push the thought away. It's probably nothing, he said to himself. Maybe an infection. It'll go away on its own. But deep inside, he was terrified. Days passed, and the pain grew worse. The skin became discolored and started to smell. He couldn't ignore it anymore. He decided to visit a doctor. At the clinic, Michael sat nervously in the waiting room. He tapped his foot and avoided eye contact with the other patients. When the nurse called his name, he hesitated before standing up. The doctor was an older man with kind eyes. "What seems to be the problem?" he asked. Michael hesitated, embarrassed, but finally explained everything. The doctor nodded and asked Michael to lie down for an examination. When the doctor saw it, his face turned pale. He put on gloves and leaned in closer. This is not normal," he said slowly. "I've never seen anything like this before." "What do you mean?" Michael asked, panic rising in his voice. The doctor sighed. "It looks like the tissue is rotting, but I can't explain why. I'll need to run some tests." Michael left the clinic feeling worse than before. He had no answers, only more questions. Over the next week, he visited more doctors, hoping someone could help him. But every doctor gave him the same response, confusion and no solution. The pain grew unbearable. He couldn't eat, couldn't sleep, and could barely walk. His once confident stride was now a slow, hunched shuffle. People who saw him whispered among themselves, noticing the change in him. One night, as he lay in bed writhing in pain, he remembered Evelyn. Her face appeared in his mind, her glowing eyes, her soft voice, and the way she had looked at him when they were together. And then, he remembered the last night he saw her. The way she had vanished without a word. The way he had betrayed her. A cold realization crept over him. This started after she left, he muttered to himself. Could she have done this? The thought seemed crazy, but the more he thought about it, the more it made sense. Evelyn wasn't like anyone he had ever met. There was something otherworldly about her, something he couldn't explain. Desperate for answers, Michael decided to find Evelyn. He searched everywhere, her favorite cafe, the park where they used to walk, and even her old apartment. But she was nowhere to be found. It was as if she had disappeared into thin air. One evening, as he sat alone in his apartment, staring at the walls, he remembered something Evelyn had once said. "You think you can hurt people and walk away without consequences," she had told him, her voice calm but firm. At the time, he had laughed it off, but now her words echoed in his mind. Michael began to realize that this wasn't a normal illness. This was something else. Something beyond the natural. He had been cursed. But how could he break the curse? The days turned into weeks, and Michael's condition grew worse. The pain was constant now, sharp, burning, and unbearable. He couldn't walk properly and spent most of his time in bed, curled up in agony. His once confident smile was gone, replaced by a face twisted with pain and fear. The smell of decay followed him everywhere, and it was so strong that even he couldn't stand it. He avoided people entirely, too ashamed to explain what was happening. His friends stopped calling, and the women he once charmed were nowhere to be found. Michael was utterly alone. One desperate morning, he returned to the doctor. This time, his condition was even worse than before. The doctor took one look and shook his head. "I'm sorry, Michael," he said. "We've run every test, but we can't find a medical explanation for this. I don't think science can help you anymore." "What does that even mean?" Michael asked, his voice breaking. "You're saying I'm going to die?" The doctor looked uncomfortable but didn't answer. Instead, he handed Michael a referral to a specialist. "Try this, but you might also want to explore other options," he said hesitantly. Michael left the clinic in despair. His life was falling apart, and no one could help him. He couldn't understand how this had happened. He had always thought of himself as untouchable, invincible. Now, he was a broken man, rotting away in the most humiliating way possible. Late one night, as he lay in bed staring at the ceiling, the memories of his past began to haunt him. He thought of Sarah, Linda, and all the other women he had hurt. He remembered the tears, the anger, and the pain he had caused. For the first time, guilt began to creep into his heart. "What kind of man have I been?" he whispered to himself. "I used people. I broke their hearts. And I never even cared." Then he thought of Evelyn. She had loved him deeply, and he had betrayed her like everyone else. But Evelyn wasn't like the others. She had warned him. And now, it seemed like her words were coming true. "This is my punishment," he muttered. "She cursed me because I hurt her." Michael decided he needed answers, real answers. He turned to the internet, searching for anything that could explain his situation. He stumbled across forums and stories about curses, spiritual punishments, and strange beings. One story caught his eye. It was about a man who had angered a marine spirit and was cursed with an unexplainable illness. The story was eerily similar to his own, and it sent shivers down his spine. The next day, Michael forced himself to leave the house. He visited spiritual healers, priests, and even traditional herbalists. But nothing worked. Every person he visited told him the same thing: his condition wasn't physical, it was spiritual. "You've wronged someone powerful," one spiritual healer told him. "You need to make peace with them, or you won't survive this." Michael was terrified. He didn't know how to reach Evelyn or how to make things right. The pain was getting worse every day, and he felt like he was running out of time. One night, as he sat alone in his apartment, he broke down and cried. He hadn't cried in years, but now he couldn't stop. "I don't want to die," he sobbed. "I'll do anything to fix this. Please, God, help me." In his desperation, he remembered an old friend, Grace. Grace was a deeply religious woman who had always tried to steer him toward a better path. Michael had laughed at her before, dismissing her faith as silly. But now, she was the only person he could think of who might help. He called her the next morning. When she heard his voice, she was shocked. "Michael? Is that you? You sound terrible." "I need help, Grace," he said, his voice shaking. "I've messed up. I think I'm cursed." Grace didn't hesitate. "Come to my church," she said. "We'll pray for you." Michael was hesitant. He wasn't a religious man, and the idea of prayer felt strange to him. But he had no other options. He agreed to meet her that evening. When he arrived at the church, Grace was waiting for him. She took one look at him and gasped. "Michael, what happened to you?" she asked, her eyes wide with concern. "It's a long story," he muttered, avoiding her gaze. Grace led him inside, where a group of people had gathered. They were kind and welcoming, but Michael felt out of place. He wasn't used to being vulnerable, and it was hard for him to admit he needed help. The pastor began to pray for him, and the others joined in. Michael sat silently at first, unsure of what to do. But as the prayers grew louder, he felt something stir inside him, a mix of fear, guilt, and hope. "God, have mercy on me," he whispered, his voice breaking. "I've made so many mistakes. Please, don't let me die like this." The prayers continued late into the night, and for the first time in weeks, Michael felt a glimmer of hope. Michael sat quietly in the church as the prayers grew louder. He could feel the weight of his guilt pressing down on him, but for the first time, he also felt something else, a strange warmth, like a flicker of light breaking through his darkness. The pastor placed a hand on Michael's shoulder. "Michael, you've carried the burden of your actions for too long," he said. "Now is the time to confess, to seek forgiveness, and to ask for mercy." Michael hesitated. His throat felt dry, and his chest was tight. But deep down, he knew the pastor was right. If he wanted to live, he had to let go of his pride and confront the pain he had caused. "I've hurt so many people," Michael began, his voice trembling. "I used women. I lied to them, broke their hearts, and never cared. And then, there was Evelyn." The pastor and the others listened intently as Michael poured out his story. He told them about Evelyn's beauty, her mysterious nature, and how deeply she had loved him. He confessed to betraying her, despite knowing how much he meant to her. She told me there would be consequences, Michael said, tears streaming down his face. And now, I'm paying the price. I don't even know where she is or how to fix this. The pastor nodded solemnly. You've wronged many, Michael, but the fact that you're here today, asking for help, shows that your heart is changing. True healing begins with repentance. The group surrounded Michael and began to pray again. Their voices were strong and filled with conviction, calling on God for mercy and healing. Michael closed his eyes and let the words wash over him. As they prayed, Michael felt something inside him begin to shift. It was as if the darkness that had consumed him was slowly lifting. He felt a deep sorrow for all the pain he had caused, but along with it came a sense of release, a chance to start over. One of the women in the group approached him. Michael, she said softly, sometimes, when we hurt people deeply, we leave wounds that only love and forgiveness can heal. Have you thought about asking God to guide you to Evelyn? Perhaps you need to make peace with her to truly be free. Michael nodded. I'll do whatever it takes, he said. I just want this nightmare to end. The pastor placed a hand on his head. God will guide you, Michael. Trust in His mercy. But remember, this isn't just about being healed. It's about changing your life, becoming a better man, and living with integrity. Michael left the church that night feeling different. The pain in his body was still there, but his heart felt lighter. For the first time in years, he felt hope. The next morning, he decided to go back to the places where he had searched for Evelyn before. He prayed silently as he walked, asking for guidance. Hours passed with no sign of her. Michael was about to give up when he remembered a small park where they had once spent an afternoon together. He hurried there, his heart pounding with anticipation. As he entered the park, his eyes scanned the area. At first, it seemed empty, but then he saw her, sitting on a bench, her long hair glowing in the sunlight. Evelyn, he called out, his voice shaky. She turned to face him, her eyes calm but guarded. Michael, she said, her voice carrying both surprise and sadness. What are you doing here? Michael fell to his knees before her. Evelyn, I'm so sorry, he said, tears streaming down his face. I know I hurt you. I lied, I cheated, and I broke your heart. And now I'm paying the price. Please, forgive me. I can't take this anymore. Evelyn looked at him for a long moment, her expression unreadable. Finally, she spoke. Michael, do you know what it means to truly repent? He nodded. It means changing. It means never going back to the man I was. I want to be better, Evelyn. I want to be someone worthy of forgiveness. She sighed and stood up, her presence still as mesmerizing as ever. You've been cursed, Michael, she said. Not just because you hurt me, but because you've lived a life of hurting others. The rot you feel isn't just physical, it's the result of your choices. I know, he said, his voice breaking. And I'm ready to make it right. Please, Evelyn, help me. Evelyn studied him for a moment, then closed her eyes. Your healing won't be easy, Michael, she said. You'll have to earn it. But if your heart is truly changed, I will lift the curse. Michael nodded eagerly. I'll do whatever it takes. Just tell me what to do. Evelyn extended her hand toward him, and a soft, warm light surrounded them. Michael felt a strange sensation, a mix of pain and relief, as the curse began to lift. But Evelyn's final word stayed with him. This is your second chance, Michael. Don't waste it. Michael woke up the next morning feeling different. The pain that had tormented him for weeks was gone. He cautiously checked himself in the mirror, and for the first time in what felt like forever, he didn't feel disgusted. His manhood was healed, the rotting skin had disappeared as if it had never been there. Tears filled his eyes as he fell to his knees. Thank you, God, he whispered. Thank you for giving me another chance. But Michael knew this wasn't the end. He had been given a second chance, but it came with a responsibility to change his life. He couldn't go back to being the man he was before, the liar, the heartbreaker, the selfish Casanova. He had to become someone better, someone who deserved this mercy. The first thing he did was reach out to the women he had hurt. It wasn't easy. Some of them refused to talk to him, still too angry or hurt by his betrayal. But others listened. He started with Sarah, the teacher who had once thought the world of him. When he called her, there was a long silence before she spoke. "What do you want, Michael?" she asked, her voice cold. "I just want to apologize," he said honestly. "I know I hurt you, and I can't take back what I did. But I'm trying to change. I hope one day you can forgive me." Sarah didn't say much, but by the end of the call, her voice had softened. "I'll think about it," she said. One by one, Michael reached out to the others. Each conversation was a reminder of the damage he had done, but it also gave him a chance to take responsibility and begin making amends. In the meantime, he returned to church. Grace welcomed him with open arms, and the group that had prayed for him became his new family. They encouraged him, guided him, and helped him stay on the path of redemption. As the months passed, Michael started to rebuild his life. He no longer sought out women to charm and manipulate. Instead, he focused on becoming a better person. He volunteered at the church, helped the less fortunate, and spent his days reflecting on the man he wanted to be. One day, while working at a community event, Michael met a woman named Angela. She was kind, down-to-earth, and nothing like the women he used to pursue. Angela wasn't dazzled by his looks or charm. She saw him for who he was, flaws and all. At first, Michael was hesitant to get close to her. He was afraid of falling back into old habits, of hurting someone again. But as he got to know Angela, he realized she was different. She didn't just bring out the best in him, she inspired him to be better every day. Michael made a conscious effort to do things differently this time. He was honest with Angela from the start, sharing his past and his journey to redemption. She listened without judgment, and over time, they built a relationship based on trust and respect. Months turned into years, and Michael became a man he could be proud of. He no longer sought validation from others or lived for the thrill of the chase. Instead, he found joy in living a meaningful life and being faithful to the woman he loved. One evening, as he and Angela walked hand in hand through the park, Michael looked up at the sky and smiled. He thought of Evelyn and the second chance she had given him. He silently thanked her, not just for lifting the curse, but for forcing him to confront the man he had been, and for giving him the opportunity to become someone better. Michael had learned the hard way that actions have consequences, but he also learned that forgiveness and redemption were possible. His life was no longer defined by his mistakes but by the effort he made to change. As Michael sat on the bench with Angela, watching the sunset, he suddenly felt a chill run down his back. The sky was bright with orange and pink, but something felt strange. He looked around nervously, his heart beating faster. It was as if someone was watching him. Then, a soft breeze brushed past his ear, carrying a faint voice. He couldn't understand the words, but it sent shivers through him. Was it Evelyn? Had she come back to test him? Angela noticed the worry on his face and held his hand tighter. "What's wrong?" she asked softly. Michael shook his head and smiled weakly, but his heart felt heavy. Deep inside, a question burned in his mind: was he truly free? Was the curse really gone, or was there more he had to do? The thought scared him. His past mistakes seemed like a shadow that refused to let him go. That night, Michael had a dream. He was back at the beach where he had first met Evelyn. The waves roared loudly, and Evelyn stood there, her eyes glowing in the dark. "Remember, Michael," she said, her voice calm but firm. "A second chance is not a promise. Stay faithful, or the darkness will return." Michael woke up with a start, his heart pounding. He looked at Angela, sleeping peacefully beside him, and whispered to himself, "I won't fail again. I can't."